Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
You know, we like to pick some pretty intense topics, and today is no exception. We're going to be talking about cultural battlegrounds.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our listeners, you guys are pretty savvy. You've probably noticed some of these battles raging around us.
Oh, absolutely. It's impossible to ignore.
Yeah, so our guidebook for this journey is Defending the West, and let me tell you, it covers a lot of ground. We're talking masculinity, white privilege, how conservatives are treated, globalism, even attacks on Christianity, and the whole climate change narrative.
It's a pretty comprehensive look at what the author sees as the biggest threats to Western civilization.
Yeah, and we're not going to sugarcoat it. Some of the stuff is pretty controversial.
Yeah.
But our goal here isn't to just regurgitate the book.
Okay.
We want to pull out the most compelling arguments, the stats, the examples that really make you think.
Exactly. We want to give you the tools to understand these debates and to form your own conclusion.
Okay, so let's jump right in with something that I know is close to home for a lot of our listeners, the so-called war on masculinity. We've all seen it, the bumbling dad in the commercial, constant portrayal of men as inconfident or out of touch.
It's become such a pervasive stereotype that it's almost become invisible.
Right, like it's just accepted as normal.
Yeah.
But our source traces this shift back to the rise of second-wave feminism in the 70s.
And they use a really interesting example, a 1970 Miss Magazine cover with a woman holding a doll and the caption, "I am not a toy, I am not a doll."
Powerful statement for women's liberation, for sure. But the book argues that it also contributed to the devaluation of traditional masculine qualities.
And what's fascinating is that this devaluation doesn't just impact men. The source makes the case that many women are actually attracted to those very traits that are now being demonized.
Frank assertiveness, protectiveness, that kind of thing.
Those qualities that make a man, those primal instincts.
And the book argues that by attacking masculinity, we might actually be undermining the very foundation of healthy relationships.
Because if men are constantly being told that their natural instincts are toxic, it's going to create a lot of confusion and resentment.
Yeah, no kidding. So it begs the question, what does a healthy, balanced expression of masculinity even look like in today's world?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that we need to be having.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Let's talk about another hot-button issue, the concept of white privilege. Now, what I found interesting about our source is they take a very critical, almost detective-like approach to this.
To really encourage the reader to question the assumptions that are often presented as fact.
Yeah, like for example, they cite statistics showing that Black and Hispanic students are actually more likely to receive financial aid than white students.
That's according to the National Center for Education Statistics.
Right, and they also point out that white people are underrepresented among the top 5% of earners in the U.S.
So they're basically saying, hold on a second, let's look at the actual data before we just accept this narrative of white privilege.
And I think that's a valid point. We need to
Yeah.
be critical thinkers and not just blindly accept what we're told.
Absolutely. And what's even more interesting is how the source goes beyond just debunking the stats. They argue that focusing solely on race can actually obscure other forms of privilege that might be even more significant.
Like class, for example.
Exactly. They say a wealthy person of color might have more advantages than a poor white person.
Right, so it's a much more nuanced perspective than just black and white.
Unintended.
Yeah, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
But seriously, this ties into their broader critique of white guilt, which they argue is ultimately counterproductive.
They say it creates more division than it solves.
And that's something I think we can all agree on. We need to move beyond blame and guilt and focus on solutions that actually address the root causes of inequality.
Absolutely. We need to focus on lifting everyone up, not tearing anyone down.
Okay, let's dive into something that I know is a major concern for a lot of our listeners, the perceived war on conservatives.
This is something that's been getting a lot of attention lately, and for good reason.
Yeah, our source uses a very specific example to illustrate this point, the case of the Google engineer who was fired for writing a memo that questioned the company's diversity policies.
Right, and it wasn't just that he was fired, it was the way he was demonized and portrayed as some kind of bigot just for expressing a different opinion.
Yeah, it was like they were trying to make an example of him.
And the source argues that this is part of a broader pattern of silencing conservative voices in big tech and beyond.
And they link this to a really alarming statistic. They claim that Google has the power to shift the voting preferences of undecided voters by up to 10%, just through the way they present information in search results.
This raises some serious concerns about censorship and the control of information in the digital age.
Absolutely. If these platforms can control what we see and hear, they can control our thoughts and beliefs.
It's a very Orwellian scenario.
It really is. And it's not just Google. They go on to talk about the media's role in this, arguing that there's a clear bias against conservative viewpoints,
They claim that the mainstream media is basically a propaganda arm of the left.
and that fact-checking organizations are often weaponized to discredit conservative viewpoints.
Right. It's like they're trying to control the narrative and silence any dissenting voices.
And this is something that we need to be very aware of because the information we're consuming is shaping our worldview whether we realize it or not.
Absolutely. We need to be critical thinkers and not just accept everything we're told.
Okay, let's shift our focus now to the global stage and the ongoing debate between globalism and nationalism.
This is another one of those issues that tends to get people really fired up.
Yeah, and our source dives right into it by using some concrete examples like the EU's refugee quotas and the secrecy surrounding the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
They highlight those concerns about open borders and the potential erosion of national sovereignty.
Yeah, they even bring up how several of the 9/11 terrorists entered the U.S. on valid visas.
They're basically saying that unchecked immigration can pose a serious security risk.
And it's not just about security. They also talk about the economic and cultural impacts of immigration.
Arguing that mass immigration can lead to lower wages for native workers and a dilution of national identity.
So it's a complex issue with a lot of different angles to consider.
It's not as simple as just being pro-immigration or anti-immigration. We need to have a nuanced discussion about the costs and benefits of different immigration policies.
No, this next topic is one that I know is very close to the hearts of many of our listeners. Christianity under attack.
This is something that we've seen happening more and more in recent years.
Yeah, and the source doesn't hold back. They argue that leftist ideologies are actively seeking to eradicate religion, particularly Christianity.
They point to the increasing secularization of society and how traditional Christian values are often portrayed as outdated or even harmful in the mainstream media and academia.
They're basically saying that Christianity is being demonized.
And they're particularly concerned about the impact of what they call the woke ideology on the family structure.
Yeah. They argue that it undermines traditional gender roles and family values, leading to the breakdown of the family unit.
It's a clash between two very different worldviews, a traditional view of family and faith versus a more progressive, secular worldview.
And the source is arguing that the traditional view is under assault.
Yeah, they're basically saying that the left is trying to redefine what it means to be a family.
Okay, let's move on to a topic that's been dominating the headlines lately, the trans agenda.
This is another one of those issues that's really polarizing.
Yeah, the source dives right into this with an example of a California teacher who labeled any dissenting views on transgender issues as transphobic.
And they use this example to illustrate a broader point that this isn't about genuine tolerance or equality, but about silencing any opposition to a particular ideology.
They argue that this agenda seeks to redefine gender and sexuality in a way that erases biological differences between men and women.
They're basically saying that the left is trying to erase the distinction between male and female.
Now, this next topic might seem a little out there to some, but I think it's important to address the war on reality.
This is where the source gets into some of the more controversial claims about climate change.
Yeah, they specifically call out Al Gore's hockey stick graph from an inconvenient truth,
which was widely criticized for its statistical flaws.
They also challenged the narrative about polar bears dying out due to melting ice caps,
pointing out that the polar bear population has actually increased in recent decades.
So they're essentially arguing that the science on climate change isn't as settled as we're often led to believe.
And they question the motives of those who are pushing this narrative,
suggesting that there's a political and economic agenda behind it.
It's a very provocative argument.
It is. And it's one that we need to be willing to have an open and honest discussion about.
Absolutely. We need to be able to question the prevailing narrative without being labeled as deniers or heretics.
Okay, and finally we're getting into something that's pretty bleak. But I think it's important to confront the decay of society.
This is where the source really lays out their pessimistic view of the future.
Yeah, they paint a pretty grim picture.
They talk about the breakdown of the traditional family unit and how it's leading to a host of social problems like crime, drug abuse, and mental illness.
And they link this back to that idea of masculinity being demonized,
arguing that we're raising boys without the traditional values of strength, responsibility, and protectiveness.
They're basically saying that we're creating a generation of men who are unprepared for the challenges of life.
And that this is going to have dire consequences for our society.
So it's a pretty sobering assessment of where we are as a culture.
It is.
Yeah.
But they also offer a glimmer of hope.
They believe that we can turn things around if we rediscover those traditional values and rebuild the institutions that have been eroded.
It's a call to action.
Yeah, they're basically saying that we need to wake up and fight for our civilization.
Powerful message.
So that covers the main chapters of Defending the West. But there are a few more that I want to touch on briefly because I think they'll be particularly relevant to you guys.
Okay, let's hear it.
For example, there's a whole chapter on the criminalization of self-defense, where the source takes a very pro-gun stance.
They argue that restricting gun ownership actually makes society less safe because it disarms law-abiding citizens and leaves them vulnerable to criminals.
It's a perspective that resonates with a lot of people who believe in the right to bear arms for self-protection.
Yeah, they're basically saying that the government can't always be there to protect us, so we need to be able to protect ourselves.
And then there's a chapter on the rise of the deep state, which taps into that idea of hidden power structures controlling things behind the scenes.
They claim that this deep state is working to undermine our values and erode national sovereignty.
It's a concept that's gained a lot of traction in recent years, particularly among those who distrust the government and the mainstream media.
Yeah, they're basically saying that there's a shadow government that's operating outside of the normal channels of power.
Okay, wow, that was a lot to unpack.
It certainly was.
And remember, this was just a glimpse into one source, one perspective on these very complex issues.
It's important to remember that there are other perspectives out there and that we need to be open to considering them all.
Absolutely. This book is just a starting point.
It's a way to get the conversation started.
It's up to each of us to do our own research and to come to our own conclusion.
And to engage in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views.
Exactly. We need to be able to have these difficult conversations without resorting to name-calling or personal attacks.
Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together.
We are, and
Yeah.
we need to find a way to bridge the divides that separate us.
I agree.
So keep thinking critically, keep questioning everything, keep fighting for what you believe in.
And most importantly, keep an open mind.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Take care. It's a lot to think about for sure. But I think one of the key takeaways from all of this is that these cultural battles aren't just about ideas.
They're about power.
Exactly. It's about who gets to control the narrative, who gets to define the terms of the debate, who gets to decide what's acceptable and what's not.
And one of the most potent weapons being used in this battle is language.
Absolutely. The way these issues are framed, the words that are used can have a huge impact on how they're perceived and ultimately who holds the power.
It's like that old saying, he who controls the language controls the masses.
Exactly. And we see this happening all the time in these cultural battles.
Like with the term white privilege, for example.
Right. The source argues that this term is intentionally divisive, designed to make white people feel guilty and less likely to push back against policies that might disadvantage them.
It's like a way of silencing dissent before it even begins.
Precisely. And it's very effective because most people don't want to be seen as racist or privileged, so they just shut down and go along with the narrative.
It's like they're being bullied into silence.
In a way, yes. And another weapon being used is the control of information.
We touched on this earlier with big tech and media bias.
But it goes way beyond that. It's about who gets to decide what information is shared, how it's presented, and who gets to control the narrative.
It's like we're living in an information bubble where we're only exposed to the information that the powers that be want us to see.
And that's incredibly dangerous. Because if we're not exposed to different viewpoints, if we're not allowed to question the narrative, then we're essentially living in an echo chamber.
And that's not good for anyone.
No, it's not.
So what can we do about it? How can we break out of these information bubbles and start thinking for ourselves?
Well, the first step is awareness. We need to be aware of the fact that we're being manipulated and that the information we're being fed isn't always objective or neutral.
Right. We need to start questioning everything.
Exactly. Don't just accept what you're told. Do your own research, read alternative news sources, and talk to people who hold different views.
Get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, exactly. And be willing to change your mind if you're presented with new
I
information.
think that's really important. Be open to new ideas and be willing to admit when you're wrong.
Absolutely, because none of us have all the answer. And the only way we're going to get closer to the truth is by having open and honest conversations with each other.
I agree. So let's keep talking, let's keep questioning, and let's keep searching for the truth.
I'm in.
Now let's bring this back to the source material and the idea of defending the West. What do you think the author means by that phrase?
I think it's pretty clear from the book that the author sees Western civilization as being under attack.
Both internal and external forces.
Right, and he believes that we need to defend those values and traditions that have made the West great.
Things like individual liberty, free speech, limited government, the rule of law, and the Judeo-Christian values that underpin our culture.
Exactly. He sees these values as being under assault from the left, from radical Islam, from globalism, and from a host of other threats.
And he's calling on people to wake up and fight back,
To defend our way of life,
to preserve our heritage.
to protect our freedom.
And I think that's a message that resonates with a lot of people.
I think so too, because I think a lot of people feel like something is wrong with our society, but they can't quite put their finger on
They
it.
sense that something is off.
Right, and I think this book gives them a framework for understanding what's happening and why.
It helps them to connect the dots.
Exactly, and it gives them a sense of hope that we can turn things around.
If we're willing to fight for what we believe in.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to go back to something we discussed earlier. The war on masculinity. It really struck me when the source talked about how society is pushing men to be more feminine.
Yeah, that was a really interesting point.
And while those qualities can be valuable, they argue that it shouldn't come at the expense of traditional masculine traits.
Right, it's about finding a balance.
Exactly. We need both masculine and feminine energy in our society.
And we need to allow men to be men without shaming them for it.
I think a lot of men are struggling with this right now. They're being told to be one way, but their instincts and their upbringing tell them something different.
It's creating a lot of confusion and frustration.
And I think it's contributing to some of the social problems we're seeing, like the decline of marriage and the rise of fatherlessness.
I agree. And this brings me to something that I think is particularly relevant to our audience today, the concept of covert contracts in relationships.
Ah, yes. This is a fascinating concept.
It refers to the unspoken expectations and agreements that exist between partners.
The things that are never explicitly stated, but everyone kind of assumes are true.
Right, like those traditional gender roles we were talking about earlier.
Maybe there was this unspoken agreement that the man would be the primary breadwinner and the woman would stay home with the kids.
But now those roles are changing.
And those unspoken agreements might not hold up anymore.
And that can lead to a lot of conflict and resentment.
Absolutely, because
Yeah.
if those covert contracts are violated, it can feel like a betrayal.
Exactly. And I think this is something that a lot of men are experiencing today. They're feeling like the rules of the game have changed, but no one told them.
And they're feeling betrayed by the women in their lives.
Right. And I think this is one of the reasons why there's so much anger and frustration among men today.
They feel like they've been lied to and that they're being punished for following the rules that they were taught.
And I think it's important for men to understand these covert contracts and to be aware of how they can impact their relationship.
It's about being aware of the unspoken expectations and having the courage to question them and to renegotiate them if necessary.
Exactly. Because if we don't, then we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment and resentment.
I think that's a really important point. And it ties into the whole red pill philosophy that many in this audience are familiar with.
Yeah, because the red pill is all about waking up to the realities of gender dynamics and challenging the prevailing narratives about relationships.
Exactly. And part of that is recognizing these covert contracts and understanding how they can impact our lives and our relationships.
It's about taking control of our own destinies and not letting ourselves be manipulated by societal expectations.
I love it. So let's keep this conversation going in part 3 of our deep dive into defending the West.
It's about taking back our power.
Yeah, absolutely. So much of what we've been talking about today comes down to power. Who has it, who wants it, and how they're using it.
And one of the key things that the author of Defending the West emphasizes is that the left is very good at using power.
They've mastered the art of manipulation.
Exactly. They know how to use language, how to control the narrative, how to play on people's emotion.
And they're not afraid to use those tactics to achieve their goals.
Which is why it's so important for us to be aware of those tactics and to learn how to counter them.
We need to fight fire with fire.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say fight fire with fire,
Yeah.
but we do need to be more strategic in how we defend our values.
We can't just sit back and let the left run roughshod over us.
Exactly. We need to be proactive, we need to be organized, and we need to be united.
And we need to be smart.
Absolutely. We need to understand the enemy's tactics and develop our own strategies for countering them.
So what are some of the things that we can do to push back against the left's agenda?
Well, one of the most important things is to support organizations that are fighting for our values.
There are a lot of great groups out there that are doing amazing work.
But they need our support, they need our money, they need our time, and they need our voices.
And we also need to be more active in our communities.
Get involved in local politics, run for office, support candidates who share our values.
And most importantly, talk to people.
Have those difficult conversations, share our ideas, explain why we believe what we believe.
We need to be willing to engage in respectful dialogue with those who disagree with us.
Because if we don't, then the only voices that will be heard are the voices of the left.
And that's a recipe for disaster.
It is. So let's get out there and start fighting for what we believe in.
I love it. And remember, if you want to dive deeper into these ideas and explore them further, the book Defending the West is available on Amazon, Kindle, and Google Play Books.
It's a great resource for anyone who wants to understand the challenges facing Western civilization.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.